Good afternoon, good evening, colleagues. Welcome to our public lecture, the first of this semester and the fourth in the series of 2023. It's very nice to see all of you, and it's always nice to know that now we're going back to the in-person events. And so welcome, and I can see quite a few of the colleagues that are joining us. And I'm sure that Dr. Christophe Paul, our senior program manager, who is going to handle the Q&A, will recognize some of you. But please don't get his neck when he hasn't introduced you once we go for the glass of wine. So we would like to thank Michael for accepting to present the first public lecture of the series this semester. And we also thank Professor Nokwanda Makunga, Knox, who has accepted to introduce Michael. So I'm going to do one or two things. I'm going to make it possible for Knox to introduce Michael, and then invite her to come and do that. We don't have any new fellows since we last met last Thursday. So, and I'm hoping that all the fellows are still okay at being at STIAS. So Knox, who is going to introduce Michael, is a plant. Well, we normally call her Knox. And I think if you go to Stellenbosch University and ask for Nokwanda, you may not get her. So she's a medicinal plant biologist in the Department of Botany and Zoology at the Stellenbosch University. And her work is heavily invested in South Africa's renowned plant biodiversity that is highly resourced with plants that have medicinal value. So she's more or less covered all the plants, and she's a pathfinder in seeing which one has medicine. So I think she will have to talk to Edwin, because Edwin reminded us that the plants talk. So then they can talk to Knox. In her laboratories at SU, she has been applying a broad-based biotechnological approach to facilitate use of plants efficiently in a non-destructive, sustainable manner, and to gain insights into the regulation of secondary metabolism. She also serves on STIAS Fellowship and Research Program Committee that coordinates the application review process for will-be and would-be fellows. Today, we see her introducing an evolutionary biologist, Michael Jennions, and perhaps Michael has something to pick from Knox's plants. So, Knox, welcome.
Thank you very much for allowing me to have this honor. And really, it is an absolute pleasure to have Michael Jennions here amongst us. He is a very well-known evolutionary biologist that is also YouTube famous because he has a very famous video that has more than 2.2 million views on YouTube. So Michael has been part of the STIAS Fellow for this particular cohort, but he started his career actually in South Africa as an MSc student at Wits, and has managed to live in 4 different continents. That being the United Kingdom, where he obtained his doctoral degree at the University of Oxford. And then he spent some time at the Smithsonian in Panama, and now lives in Australia and is working at an Australian university. So it's really lovely to have you back, and back at home, I suppose. He has worked on a variety of different organisms, particularly animals, and has also dabbled a little bit in humans, and he's really interested in evolutionary aspects that are linked to sex. So today we're going to hear a lot about the ins and the outs of sex, apparently. And at the same time, he has had many different publications in some of the most prestigious scientific journals, including some publications in Nature, as well as Nature Communications, and many other really high-impact profiled journals that are linked to ecology and evolutionary biology. And as a result, we even have some of my colleagues who decided not to miss this particular event and join in hearing what Michael will be telling us in terms of 3 research questions, I think, that he wants to answer in relation to the ins and the outs of sex. And I'm sure the Q&A session is going to be very fiery, as many of us are still fascinated by that particular topic. Michael, over to you.
All right. Thank you very much, Knox. That was a very kind introduction. And I feel if you're here based on the title, you need to seriously lower your expectations. Remember, those who can do, those who can't teach. So I'd like to thank STIAS for this incredible opportunity. Thank you to Edward, Christoph, Nelmarie, Karen, Leonard, Gina, Akim, and everyone behind the scenes in the kitchens, the gardens, the cleaning staff. It's fantastic. And of course, to you for being here. So this is a public talk, but there are STIAS fellows here from other disciplines that I'd like to provoke just a little bit, and also fellow biologists, maybe seeking something new. So I've tried to put in a little something for everyone, which might, of course, mean a lot of nothing for everyone. So let's find out. So the title of my STIAS fellowship is Nature is Beautiful, and it is. And it appeals to many people. So these photos are by my friend Dan Polikow, a professor of actuarial science at Stellenbosch University. So even grey men in suits can appreciate nature. I hope, oh, there he is. I mean, sometimes nature is frighteningly beautiful. So this is a deadly taipan snake photographed in the wild, in situ, by my friend Damien. How Damien is still alive is a mystery to many of us. But this image is a reminder that nature can inspire awe. And if we zoom in on animals, they often become even more beautiful, the colours and shapes. And it's not just animals. We appreciate plants, as Knox will tell you. More specifically, we love flowers. I mean, we even put them in our homes, on our dining tables, which is a little bit weird because flowers are basically extrovert genitalia that function to make the botanical equivalent of sperm and eggs. So maybe don't think of that the next time you sniff a flower or hand a bunch to your mom on her birthday. Little tip. So when we go beyond individual organisms and look at the totality of nature, we can be overwhelmed. There's sweeping vistas like the fynbos-covered mountains that surround us here in Stellenbosch, and we feel connected to something bigger than ourselves when we are in nature. I say we are in nature, but this photo for me encapsulates that there's no true division between humans and nature. Both of these individuals have looks on their faces that speak to deep emotions. She is dying, and he is losing his adopted daughter after 14 years of care and parenting. And that's just because there's an unbroken thread of ancestry linking us to all life, every living thing on this planet. But if I really want to convince you of the beauty of nature, I'm going to ask you to look at tiny details. So look at these marvelous objects magnified on the right. Notice the shapes. Appreciate the subtle colors, the strange swirls, the striking markings. So who made these? What are they for? Are they jars created for some ritual purpose? Are they the works of some skilled potter? No, they are egg cases of stick insects. And if you look at them, that begs a bigger, deeper question. Who is the artist? Who made them here and why? Now, sometimes there's a genuine artist in nature. Here you can see a satin bowerbird from Australia. So the males deliberately build a boma-like structure and they decorate it with colourful objects to attract females. So nowadays, blue plastic milk bottle caps are a favourite. So when you go out and see a bower, you know that someone intentionally made this. And in fact, whenever we look at anything that looks designed, we seek out the artist. So here, for example, are wonderful chairs and resting places that mimic nature, but they clearly have a design. You can see they were made by someone. In this case, they were made by David, the boy who sat behind me at school in Johannesburg doodling on his textbook. So it paid off. David made them. So let's go back to these egg cases. Now, of course, we don't think stick insects intended to create beauty, but we do think the cases are designed to protect eggs. But designed by whom? So now when we say nature is beautiful, we're just simply describing our response to life itself. We're not asking about its origins, but I want to know who the artist is. So should I say Mother Nature? I don't think so. That's a cheap trick. Mother Nature is simply a personification of nature. So some people will answer God. Great. Which God? I mean, there are so many to choose from. Gods appear almost as fast as new languages. So I'd argue there's a simpler, more powerful, and more humbling answer, and it doesn't require faith, and it's supported by the available facts. The artist is blind. She does not know what she's creating. The artist is not even a she or a he or a they. The artist is the blind process of evolution. So Levon Biss is the artist whose stunning photos catalogue nature here, but evolution created these tiny miracles. All right, that's my arty-farty bit. So this leads me into my talk, evolution. So like all biologists, I'm trying to explain nature, but I'm not trying to catalogue diversity. Honestly, I'm a terrible natural historian. Instead, what I'm trying to do is seek patterns in nature. Are there common principles that apply to most or even all species? If so, what are they? Because without such insights, we're going to be overwhelmed by the scope of biodiversity. And evolution by natural selection offers an answer. It provides a theory that allows us to generalize and predict. And evolution is ultimately all about SEX. Well, it's actually about reproduction and replication. Now, I had a less cheesy alternative title for this talk, as opposed to the shameless one I used, and it struck me as perfectly appropriate, but also highly inappropriate. So this title is for our resident artist, Willem, who seems to like wordplay. Now, if you're easily offended and you speak Afrikaans, please close your eyes for the next slide. In English, the end is nigh. Because truly, the end product of if you're not from here, get someone to explain it to you. Because truly, the end product of evolution is organisms that appear designed to reproduce as often as they can. That's the defining feature of life. Get laid or die trying. So occasionally, an old white guy actually gets it right. This is one that did. So Darwin worked out that natural selection creates the illusion of design. All you need is one, individuals that vary in traits, say their speed, their size, whatever. Two, that these traits affect their lifetime reproductive success. In other words, bigger individuals have more offspring, or faster individuals have more offspring. And three, these traits have to be heritable. Offspring have to resemble parents. So Darwin spoke only of traits. He didn't know about DNA. So nowadays we usually talk of genes, but this is a topic for later, maybe afterwards. The main point here is that all you need are those three things, and natural selection relentlessly favors genes for traits that increase the ability to produce related descendants. That's it. It's so simple, but to grasp what that really means can take a lifetime. So to illustrate evolutionary theory and the central role of sex, I'm going to give you 3 case studies from our lab team, and I hope they make for a sweet harmony, but let's see how we go. So part 1, I warn you, is the most theoretical, but I've really tried to hide the maths. If you can survive this, parts 2 and 3 will be easy. So sex allocation theory is about investing in being male and female. For example, this man is holding a barramundi fish from Northern Australia. So barramundi change sex, they go from male to female. And sex allocation theory predicts at what size they will change sex, and why they are male first, then female, and why other species it's the other way around. So I want to quickly acknowledge my 2 co-authors here, Andrew, a fantastic former PhD student, and Hanna, a brilliant, world-class Finnish theorist. Right. So sex, gender, trans, cis, women-only spaces, drawing boundaries has created fierce debates in some countries right now. And these are often painful issues for the affected individuals. But as a biologist, in principle, male and female is easy to define. So look at these 2 fish. The one on the right is inserting a muscular tube into an orifice in the one on the left. It's then going to squirt its sex cells into the one on the left. The one on the left will end up with a belly full of babies. So which is male and which is female? So by definition, these fish, they are seahorses. The one on the right is the female, not the male. This is because the size of sex cells alone defines biological sex. Large sex cells, eggs, equals female, and small sex cells, sperm or pollen, equals male. Now, there are many downstream effects that follow from this really trivial difference between in gamete size or sex cell size, and hence the number of sex cells. But these are all secondary, those changes, to the core sex difference. So I'm going to use the standard gamete-based definition for male and female for this talk. I'd just point out, though, that gender and sex are distinct, and I'm only talking about the latter. So I'm not talking about humans here. All right. I've told you how evolution by natural selection works. We've got those 3 requirements, and now I've got a question. Do you want to make sons, those sperm squirters, or daughters, the egg carriers? So let me elaborate. More formally, do you think evolution by natural selection will favor genes for the ability to make mainly sons, A, or genes to make mainly daughters, B, or genes to make both? And if both, in what ratio? So we can do a quick vote on this. We don't need fancy technology. So if you could all just clap for a second. Fantastic. I didn't even have to do anything and I got a round of applause. Okay, let's use clapping for voting. If you think A, clap. If you think B, clap. All the feminists. If you think C, clap. All right. I'm not going to ask you to tell me what ratios, but not everyone was in uniform agreement there. So I hope you felt there were 2 conflicting factors at play to make a decision. First thing you should have thought about is, wow, sons can be very successful. They can have lots of descendants. So Ishmael ibn Sharif allegedly had 800 plus children. I mean, his mom must have been super proud of him. I mean, that is a lot of grandkids. I mean, Mick Jagger, in comparison, he's only sired a paltry 8 that we know of. Even so, I mean, 8 children is more than most women will ever deliver. So the answer seems easy. Why didn't you pick A? Make sons, right? But hang on, you kind of go, not so fast. Because you also might sense that daughters set the limits on growth. I mean, and in the extreme, a population with only males is doomed. So maybe you're thinking, it's 50-50. You think you're smart, right? But now imagine an island with 10 females, 5 males and 5 females. What does that yield? 5 sets of offspring. But what if you had an island with 9 females and 1 male? You'll now get 9 sets of offspring. So it seems easy. The answer is to make mainly daughters. Well done, Linda. Now, here's a piece of jargon to solve the puzzle. Reproductive value. So reproductive value is the expected contribution of organisms in that stage of life, at birth, say, to lifetime reproductive success. So what you have to ask yourself is, what is the reproductive value of a son or daughter at birth when you make one? Because natural selection is going to favour parents that are designed to make whichever sex has the highest value, gives them the most grandkids. That's the sex you want to make. So what's the answer? So let's start by thinking about a species where everyone's producing twice as many daughters as sons. So the adult population would look like this. So if these individuals then mate, that's my equivalent of mating, we can see that the value of a male is twice that of a female. For every set of offspring by a female, the male is going to be mating twice, right? So a parent should produce sons. So let's say that everyone starts to make twice as many sons as daughters. So the population would now look like this. But now, males have half the value of females. That's because either half the males don't breed or they have to share paternity. There's no extra offspring available for them to create. So again, parents should make more daughters because now daughters are more valuable. So the balancing point is, of course, equal production of sons and daughters. That'll work. Great. So now we know the answer. And even if you thought it was 50-50 before, if you couldn't have explained it, that doesn't really count as an answer. I know you'd like it to. So this is basically known as the Fisher condition. It's used a lot in evolutionary biology. Now, it seems trivially obvious, but it's incredibly easy to forget when you make theoretical models. Trust me on this, I've done it. So everyone has one mom and one dad. And you should never forget that when you're talking about heterosexual sex and things that lead to sex differences. It's very powerful. So let's pause and rewind, because some of you might go, okay, but you know what? The ratio is 50-50 because a dad gives his offspring either an X or a Y chromosome to go with the X you always get from your mother because she's double X. So this is a constraint. So Michael, your theory is really fancy, woo, well done you, but it's overly complicated. So how can I convince you otherwise? So to do this, I need to show you how evolutionary theory can correctly predict unusual, unanticipated offspring sex ratios. And to do this, I'm going to point out that sex doesn't only, don't think about this too much. Sex does not only occur between same-age individuals. So in some species, older and younger animals pair up. This can cause trouble. So we can modify the basic sex allocation model, and I'll show you what I mean. So imagine that in generation A, sons and daughters are produced equally, like we just predicted. But then some sex-specific disease kills half the males. Now, if there's generational overlap, this male shortage affects the optimal sex ratio in the next generation, generation B. So in this toy example, for generation B parents to produce sons and daughters that have equal value, they have to make more sons than daughters. That's the ratio. And you can see there it then works out that they have the same value, those sons and daughters. Now, unfortunately, empirical evidence for sex-specific mortality and generational overlap of this sort that affects offspring sex ratios is hard to come by. So how do we test this? So we could look at natural experiments, say wars, that lead to far fewer men. So if there's overlap between the generations, there's an absence of men for the next generation. Or we could look at, say, selective abortion of girls, as is occurring in China and India, that creates an excess of males. But these are ultimately, in the big scope of history, rare events. And natural selection by evolution requires something that happens again and again for genetic change to accumulate under selection. So we need something predictable that happens regularly in the world at large. So what could that be? So one thing is seasons. They're predictable and they're annual. Spring, summer, spring, summer, autumn, winter, here in the beautiful Western Cape. And what if there's a sex difference in mortality at some times of year? If this was to happen, then the overlap between generations will differ for males and females. So in this example, there's going to be more females than males from the previous cohort alive next spring, because the females are better at surviving than the males at a certain time of year. And it's going to go round and round. So to test this, we did a study in Canberra, where I live, and we had 3 study sites. Now, I wish I could tell you we worked on a cool Australian animal like this echidna that lays eggs and gives birth to babies called puggles. I mean, I know, they're really cute, right? Cute. Instead, we worked on an invasive Northern Hemisphere fish. And like most colonialists, it's hard to get rid of, and it seems to be here to stay. But it is a great study species. So mothers give birth to babies. We can catch females in the field at different times of the year, bring them into the lab, wait until they give birth, rear the offspring, and then we can sex them. And sexing is easy because males have an elongated fin. Basically, it's like a penis for the fish. And this isn't trivial, because trying to sex fish when they've just got normal fins is pretty tricky, and I'm not very good at it. If you want to know more about this appendage, ask me afterwards. So what Andrew did is he went out and sampled about 3 sites every 2 weeks, and he found strong peaks in breeding in spring and autumn based on the number of pregnant females. So to simplify, let's just say there are 2 main breeding events per year, in spring and autumn. Next, Andrew used the seasonal change in body size of males and females to work out the life history of the mosquito fish. I'm going to spare you the details, but the main message is that males breed in a single season, and some females live longer and breed in both spring and autumn. So here's a cartoon of the life cycle. You can see eggs surrounded by sperm in the cartoon. So in spring, there are only eggs from females born from the previous autumn, these purple females. So they're born in autumn, they overwinter, and in spring, males and females breed. These fertilized eggs then create a spring-born cohort that breeds again. There's the spring-born cohort that breeds again in autumn. So the spring-born females are in yellow. But so what I want you to notice, though, is this little weird feature. Some of the purple females breed in spring, but they survive and they breed again in autumn. So in autumn, there are eggs from young females born in spring, and there are eggs from older females that were born the previous autumn and have survived to breed again. So when is it best to be a male? Anyone venture a guess? When would you rather be a male, spring or autumn? Is it? How do we know you're not a fish? I can play the philosopher game too. You're not even here. All right, so the answer, of course, is not such a great idea here, it would seem, but it would seem to be a great idea if you're born in spring to be a male, because you've access to eggs from the females from your cohort, plus these extra eggs from the females from the previous cohort. So next we do some fancy maths. We'll spare you it. And we can predict the offspring sex ratio in spring in green and autumn in orange. We use the Fisher condition that I introduced you to help us and make sure we do the maths right. And we also make this condition that sons and daughters evolve to be equally valuable to parents. And the main thing you'll notice is that the ratio of sons to daughters reflects how many eggs in autumn are from old females, that's the EO, old female eggs, versus young female eggs. And these are numbers we can actually estimate. So what we do is we'll collect fish in autumn, and we'll measure what proportion of those pregnant females in autumn are from the spring cohort, the young ones that are smaller, and from the previous cohort, older ones that are bigger. And then we measure how fecund they are, how many babies do they have, and then we can work out the average number of eggs being produced by these two cohorts of females. And we can then plug it into the equation. Oh, hang on. I don't know why it went backwards there. Oh, yeah. Okay, so we plug it into that. So here are the predictions from theory. So the vertical axis is the proportion males. The dotted line is your intuition to always make 50-50. That's what probably a lot of people think you should be doing. And the horizontal axis shows you the extent to which females survive and breed again in autumn. And what I want you to notice is that the amount of overlap varies between our sites A, B, and C. They vary in how many of individuals of those females survive to breed again in autumn. And that, as that increases, the amount of overlap, the deviation from 50-50 increases. And as we sort of intuited, we see in spring there should be males being produced, more males, more sons and daughters, and vice versa in autumn, which is maybe less intuitive. So here, based on theory, are the predicted offspring sex ratios. And now I'm going to show you what we actually observed. And for biology, this is really good. The rank order is perfect. Now, if nothing else, note that it's not 50-50, as you might naively have assumed. And note also that the ratio of sons to daughters switches between spring and autumn. So evolutionary theory worked. Yay. Or I'd be out of a job. So 2 lessons. Lesson 1, as individuals of one sex become rarer, they each become more valuable. And lesson 2, evolution can still lead to the deviations from 1 to 1. And this theory isn't just for fish or the birds. It's applied to many species with strange natural histories that allow us to test the robustness of the theory. It can help us understand sex ratios in everything from fig wasps to soil mites to African wild dogs. And here is the paper if you want some more info. I'm now going to drink water. I'm not going to do ventriloquism though. I'm just going to drink water. All right, okay, that's the hard bit over. Well done. So enough fancy schmancy maths and theory. The rest of the talk is easier. I'm going to ask a very simple question. Is being clever a smart idea? A lot of you have thoughts on this. So, and for the biologists in the room, this is unpublished work, so you're getting a first peek. So this study was led by Ivan and Beck. Ivan is holding a board game that he and a fellow student created. I don't recommend it for children, but it's very creative. So recently there have been some high-profile studies of animals that have linked cognitive abilities to their evolutionary success. And success, just to drive it home, is leaving more descendants. So this is a key study from 2018 published in Nature. It's on Australian magpies. And the splashy headline was that smarter females have more babies. So, cool bananas. So how did the team estimate a bird's smartness? They used 4 assays. Inhibitory control. The bird shouldn't try to peck through a plastic tube to get to some food. It needs to show restraint, go round to the side and stick its beak in to get the food. Associative learning. It has to learn that only one of these coloured lids has food under it, and it has to learn which lid it is. Reversal learning. The team then switch which coloured lid has food under it. The bird has to unlearn the previous association and relearn the new connection, the new colour. And finally, spatial learning. 1 of 8 lids has food under it. The bird has to learn where it is in the configuration. So the birds can learn to perform these tasks. So we decided to do a similar study, but only looking at males. And I'm going to justify this in a moment. So we used an emblematic Australian lizard, the frill-necked lizard. I'm lying. Of course we didn't. We used these stupid, dull fish. Okay, well, they're dull perhaps, but they're not stupid. So Ivan and Beck ran the equivalent 4 assays used on birds. The difference is the males were rewarded by getting close to females, not food. Male mosquito fish like females. They like them a lot. They try to mate incessantly, and they are highly motivated to approach females. And the good news is that males learned. So these fish are pretty smart. They can learn. So a quick technical note slide for nerds. For the inhibitory control assay, we distinguish between what happened the first time a male was tested, when he had to try and swim through a transparent barrier to reach the female, which we called his initial impulsiveness. And then we used the average of the subsequent trials, how long he spent trying to swim through the barrier, as a measure of inhibitory control. We also measured boldness, which was the time taken to leave a start area and explore the test arena. So this is a personality trait, and we'll revisit animal personality in part 3 of the talk. So are some males better at all these tasks than others? And if this was the case, we'd expect a positive relationship of individual performance across the different tasks. And we did find positive relationships for 9 of the 10 possible correlations. So naively, you might think, yes, there's really smart fish and dumb fish. But if you're ultrastats nerdy, you'll notice that there's only weak evidence that these are real. Again, this is a real slide for the nerds, forgive me. The main message for you, though, is that statistically the relationship could be positive by chance alone. So we look at each measure of cognition on its own merit. So there was no general intelligence that we could detect in these fish, even though we did calculate their average performance across these 5 different measures. So I said I'm going to justify looking at males. So one reason is a claim that sexual selection is responsible for humans having such large brains for our body size. So sexual selection is natural selection on traits that increase mating or fertilization success. And in general, sexual selection is much stronger on males. And it leads to the evolution of traits like ornaments, courtship displays, and weaponry used to fight rivals. Now, Geoffrey Miller popularized this claim about humans in his book, The Mating Mind. It's why some people say the brain is the sexiest organ. Really? I mean, you know the spiel. This is the one about women like men who are funny or clever. Now, to me, it sounds exactly like the kind of self-serving argument that only a geeky academic would champion. Am I right? So I'm skeptical. Now, there is evidence that being smart is... is there evidence that being smart is sexually selected? So we've got a few field studies showing that smarter females, usually females, have more offspring. But why? Because if you think about it, it could be because they're better at surviving and then have more opportunities to breed, or because they're sexier, better at attracting mates and fertilizing eggs, and we don't really know. And there are very few, arguably no studies that have tested for this for males. So one exception is a study on budgies. Here, males that solved problems were more attractive to females. But this isn't quite the same as having more offspring. I mean, a lot can happen between being very good looking and actually having kids. I'm kidding, I've got kids. Okay, I'm really kidding. I don't have kids, and I do have a mirror. Okay, I know what I'm working with. So Evan and Beck tested the smart, sexy male idea in mosquito fish. So they took the males that we'd done the cognitive assays with, and they split them across 11 ponds. And each pond had the same number of males to virgin females. Well, they were virgins briefly. So the fish were left to 8 weeks to do their own thing. Beck then caught the females. The mothers gave birth in the lab, and we used DNA paternity testing to identify the fathers. So this is like CSI Fish Pond, worst TV show ever. So about 80% of females had babies. So most females had babies, but only about 45% of the males sired these babies. 55% of males had nothing. And this greater variation in male than female reproductive success is common in many species. More about this in part 3. For now, though, we've got only one question. Which males were the big winners and which were the losers? So many thousands of dollars later, always collaborate with Germans. Here is the answer. The average cognitive performance, no. I'm just going to go through these. Inhibitory, control, impulsiveness, spatial learning, associative learning, reversal learning, boldness, body length. And the answer is these three. Males with stronger inhibitory control, they're significant if they deviate from 0, where there's no correlation. So males with stronger inhibitory control, higher impulsiveness, and better spatial learning all did better than their rivals and had more offspring. Amazing. I mean, I think we were genuinely surprised. I mean, body size, which usually works really well, did not predict a male's success. So this is academics 1, jocks nil, boom, yay. Little catch though, what if males that are really smart when they're young are dumb when they pay the price and are dumb when they're old? So maybe there's no benefit to smartness over a lifetime. But fortunately, Evan and Beck had retested males when they were much older. So again, I'm going to spare you the stats. The main finding is that there was no trade-off. We didn't find a significant negative relationship between young and old males' performance. For 2 of the 5 essays, and in fact for the average across all essays, males that were smarter when young were also smarter when old. The relationship was significantly positive. And I have to say, last week I confidently poured Ceres grapefruit juice over my breakfast cereal, and I felt, man, I did not get that memo. So in sum, we found the following. No evidence for general intelligence, no trade-off between being smart when you're young and old, but for 3 of the 5 cognitive traits we looked at, they were correlated with male success, and it was related to breeding because the males didn't die in those ponds. They were all alive. So that variation in success that's not due to chance alone is related to their ability to acquire females and fertilize eggs. So smart is sexy, and you should go around and tell people that. So this last result is pretty novel. And hopefully this paper will appear in a top journal soon and have a STIAS badge on it, so fingers crossed. I'm going to take some more water while you look at this. We've got about 10 minutes to go. I hope you can hang in there. So I like this photo because everything in it is edible. It's bread, flour, broccoli, potatoes, I don't know, some grains. So it's another case of art imitating nature. So part 3, 11 minutes, 10, 11 minutes. So what about sex differences? Because in many animals, male-female differences are huge, but humans? So I have to be honest, apart from that ridiculous study I did years ago, I try to avoid working on humans. But media pundits keep using animals to make claims about men and women. So reflecting on tomorrow's public holiday, which is great that South Africa has actually a public holiday for Women's Day, is a story about animals and humans, men and women. So this is led by my former PhD student and colleague, Lauren Harrison, along with my colleague, Dan Noble. All right. So a little story. In 2005, Larry Summers, who was then president of Harvard, speculated that there are more men than women in physics departments at top universities because, even if men and women have the same average ability, the variability among men is greater. So in common language, this is the idea that among men you get more geniuses and more complete idiots than was the case for women. And Summers also suggested that this greater male variation could not be explained by culture and had a biological basis. So understandably, he got in a lot of trouble for thinking out loud, although of course thinking out loud is what we should do. Now Steve Pinker, who I actually like, I know some people won't, defended him. He wrote, and Edwin, I'm going to copy you and do this because I can, open quotes. The pattern is readily explained by evolutionary biology. Since a male can have more offspring than a female, but also has a greater chance of being childless, think of the fish, winners and losers, natural selection favors a slightly more conservative and reliable baby-building process for females and a slightly more ambitious and error-prone process for males. This is because the advantage of an exceptional daughter, who can still have only as many children as a female can bear and nurse in a lifetime, even Mick Jagger has more than a female, would be cancelled out by her unexceptional sisters. whereas an exceptional son who might sire several dozen grandchildren can more than make up for his dull, childless brothers. One doesn't have to accept the evolutionary explanation to appreciate how greater male variability could explain in part why more men end up with extreme levels of achievement. He says you don't have to accept the evolutionary explanation, but come on, it's baked into that. So it sounds like these guys have got some really cool data about male and female animals. They're clearly fantastic evolutionary biologists. So let's see if that's true. Now, it's true that men seem to be more variable than women. So in a study led by my colleague Rose O'Day, we looked at the grades of school children, and indeed boys were more variable than girls. But why? So is this really a legacy of sexual selection on males of the type we saw in those little fish? Now, research on animals does support greater male than female variability, but it's usually for physical traits, things like body size, or it's for sexually selected traits, things like weapons, like these horns, or ornaments, like these crazy stalk eyes of stalk-eyed flies. So the evidence for greater male variability is weak for behavior. So should we assume males are more variable? I say let's not. We're scientists. Let's get some data. So we focused on animal personality studies. So very briefly, animals like humans exhibit behaviors that are often assigned to one of 5 personality types. And we chose to look at animal personality because they occur in both males and females, and they're measured in similar ways across different species. So we can look at all the data and we can test if males and females really do tend on average to differ in their variability. So we did a meta-analysis. Basically that means that you trawl the literature for data, and you convert every statistical test looking for a male-female difference into a common currency called an effect size, and then you test if the average effect size differs from the null hypothesis that males and females are identical. And you can also test if other factors might explain variation in the effect size among studies. Specifically, you could suggest that maybe when there's stronger sexual selection in a species, it's going to increase any male-female differences in variability. So Lauren did an amazing job and amassed a big data set of over 220 species. So this is what we found. And let me walk you through this graph quickly because it's the same for the next few slides. So the top graph is the mean value of the 5 behaviors in different colors. The bottom graph is the sex difference in variance, and each circle represents an effect size. And the red line is an effect of 0, which means there's no male-female difference, and the thick black line is the 95% confidence interval for our estimate of the mean effect size. So in brief, if that line includes 0, there's no robust evidence for a sex difference. But don't look too closely, I'll make it very clear where it does or doesn't deviate. So values to the left are female biased, values to the right are male biased. And I'll very quickly show you all 5 taxa. We're nearly done. So for mammals, there were no significant sex differences for any of the 5 personality traits for either the mean value or variability. In birds, females were more sociable, and females, not males, were more variable in their exploration. In reptiles and amphibians, males were more explorative, and males were more variable in aggression. So there's 1 tick for Summer and Pinker. In fish, males were more variable in sociality, but females more variable in aggression. Kind of 1-1. Insects, nothing going on. Let's move along. So let's get to the point. We ran 50 tests, and there's basically little or no support for the broad claim that male animals are more variable than female animals in these measured behaviors. Okay, so maybe sex differences and variability only occur in species where there's strong sexual selection. So then we put sexual size dimorphism into our models. We use that because it's the best proxy we have of sexual selection on males. In species where males tend to be a lot larger than females, like these elephant seals, that's a male and that's a female, not a pup. Sexual selection tends to be stronger. So we found that Sexual selection had a significant effect on the male-female difference in mean values for activity and aggression in mammals, but crucially, there was no effect of the sex difference on variation in males and females. So what have we learned? Well, we didn't find any consistent evidence for greater male variability in personality traits, and we found no moderating effect of sexual selection on the sex difference in variability. And there's another study by some colleagues that looked at mice, looked at 29,000 of these little buggers, and it's the same message. Sometimes males are more variable, sometimes females. It depended on the trait. So for us, the lack of evidence in our meta-analysis suggests that accepting evolutionary explanations for greater male variability in behaviour in humans is probably premature. Now, of course, if you want, you can make some counter-arguments. So you could say, as some people have in the reviewing process, well, maybe mammals as a whole don't show greater male variability than females, but primates do. So you should only look at primates. But I suspect even if we did that and there was no pattern in primates, they'd say, well, maybe humans are special, maybe men are more variable than women because of past sexual selection on males. So I'll leave you to decide what best practice is here. I'd simply note that in my experience, in the absence of evidence from other animals, I'm going to err on the side of assuming that how we set up society, how we provide opportunities to young women, and what we value is a much better starting explanation for why so few women have Nobel Prizes or in physics departments. I personally wouldn't start by invoking evolved biological differences. So if you want to read more, here's the paper. If you're in the humanities or social sciences, please cite it so we can be part of the debate. And that's it. So I'd like to thank STIAS, ANU, my wonderful students, I should really say colleagues, and two people I want to single out because they worked so hard and have kept all the fish work going, Dr. Megan Head on the left and Dr. Beck Fox on the right. That's it. Thank you.
Thank you, Michael, for a wonderful presentation, beautiful slides and photographs, and a clear message, I think, for all of us in the room. Thank you so much. We'll open for any comments and questions from the audience here. Those of you online, please feel free to participate by writing in the chat box. If we have time, we'll try to get to some of those. If we don't, we'll make sure that all those comments reach Michael, and we'll leave it to him to respond. We have a microphone, and because we'd like the online audience to hear you, please do use it. Marie has one at the back as well. So let's open for any questions.
Always after a talk, my brain is whirring and I never know what anyone's saying. So apologies in advance. That's my excuse.
Thanks, Michael. That was fabulous. I mean, it illustrates very well the fact that funny men are very attractive. It was you really put it across. Well done. I mean, we've talked about this about men. That there's not good evidence for men being more variable. But what's the evidence for males having more anomalies?
I think in humans there is evidence that men are more variable than women, as far as I know. Again, this is not my area of expertise, so I kind of threw out, I made sure I included that last study because there are experts in this room who would have more to say on this topic. All I really wanted to get across is that don't use animals to justify. But I think there is evidence in humans, as far as I know, that there are more anomalies in men, and that sometimes is related to this argument about X and Y chromosomes, and that having two X chromosomes, genes on the X chromosome, you've got two chances basically, and if a male has something bad on the X, it's expressed because there's basically very few genes on the Y. So females are kind of buffered a little bit.
I think we both looked up the issue about left-handedness, that it definitely is increased amongst boys than girls.
Yeah.
Thanks.
Populations tend to send the males out to wage wars. What is behind that? Is there reasoning behind that, or evolutionary utility behind that, or survival probability increase, or is it not the case at all?
Could you just say the very beginning? I missed the very beginning of what you were saying.
Populations send out the males to wage wars.
Yes, so the reason why men are violent and aggressive, I suspect this is one of those cases where I would be hard-pressed not to invoke biology a little bit. I mean, given that this is such a prevalent pattern across all animals, and even though I've tried to make the point here of move with caution from animals to humans, I am a biologist, and I think we are animals, and we have a connection with them, and so there does seem to be something there in our biology that makes males more aggressive than females, and this seems to be in every society. If you want to find a murderer, look for a man before you look for a woman. It's how it is. I mean, I stand corrected, but I don't know of any societies where women are violent and men are the peaceful ones. And same in most animals. I mean, there are some exceptions in the animal kingdom, but that's the overwhelming pattern. But why sexual selection is stronger on males than females is probably something that would take me too long to explain now, but I'm happy to chat afterwards.
Thanks. I saw Johan.
Yeah, thanks. I guess on the topic of war, I mean, you've mentioned some of those studies that reflect on the response, kind of the demographic response after war. And so I'm kind of curious, like, why would it be that after a war we do tend to see more boys being born? What in us produces that?
So again, this is not a literature I'm super familiar with. I realize I should be, but I tend to bounce around on topics. I do the study, get the data out, and then everyone else can have an argument. But there are these claims of changes in sex ratios after World War II, but it's like a one-off event, and I don't know how good the data is, and I know the data on human sex ratios is often very disputed. I guess in principle, if you're asking about the mechanism, I mean, it's possible that there would be an evolved response to seeing variation in the number of males and females you encounter, and this could have, say, for example, hormonal changes, which then change the likelihood that you produce a male or a female. And I have to add at this point, it's kind of funny, but the kind of biology I'm doing, we're using evolutionary theory to predict what will happen, is sometimes called sort of black box biology, because it's like, I don't know how it happens at the proximate level, I just know it happens, and that's what's predicted by theory as what natural selection will lead to. And someone else can go and work out the details, I'm just telling you this is going to happen. And sex ratios are a little bit like that. We don't always understand the mechanisms by which species can skew the sex ratios. But the fact that they're not 50-50, even when there's chromosomal sex determination, warblers in the Seychelles are the famous example. So they have sex chromosomes, but they're able to produce very skewed sex ratios depending on the exact circumstances of the nest, whether it's good to produce a son or a daughter because one of the sexes preferentially helps the parents at the nest.
Interesting.
Thank you for the talk, Michael. So my question is, where are the LGBT fish? But seriously though, in your studies, you talk about this particular fish as always, the males always seeking the women, the females. But what about, did you see asexuality? Did you see variation in desire? Did you see any?
This is one of the challenges, right? Like again, this is why humans are weird. I'm not making human though.
I mean, even within the fish population.
No, I'm going to answer. I will answer the question. So humans are weird because we just seem to have so many aberrant behaviours. Or, well, I say aberrant. That's probably the wrong word. We have such a wealth of behaviours, and in the fish. Or let me not say the fish. Let me say crickets. So I worked on crickets for a number of years. I must have sexed 10, 20,000 crickets. In those 20,000, I saw one individual which was calling, representative of a male, and also had an ovipositor, an egg-laying probe like a female. And 1 in 20,000. And as a biologist, that's like basically it didn't happen. Of course, if it's an individual human being, that is very different, my response. But I would say it's because essentially evolution is pretty ruthless. It's driving down two pathways. If you're not successful at being male or being female, you're not going to pass on your genes. Those genes are going to be eliminated. So That's the answer, is natural selection relentlessly favouring specialisation in being male or female. And of course, sometimes that can be being male and female in the same individual. There is many species which are hermaphroditic simultaneously. There are others where sequentially they go, like the fish, the barramundi, they go from one sex to the other. But they go from one to the other. They don't sort of produce intermediate-sized gametes. They go from producing sperm to producing eggs. They don't produce smegs or whatever you want to call them. That's just what happens. And I know there's been a lot of debate in social media about this, but these are the biological facts, and I have to state them clearly.
Thanks, Craig. We have 2 hands here and 3.
I just want to hear your take on the hypothesis, or there's some evidence for it, that females of better body condition actually produce more males. And why would that be?
Yes, so there's this idea of condition-dependent sex determination. So this is where it can get confusing, because when we sort of think about sort of genes for producing a specific ratio, a lot of people think of genes deterministically, like it'll always be produced this particular ratio. But of course, you get interactions between the organism and the environment, and they can modify what they do in response to that, so-called phenotypic plasticity, and it would be adaptive if you shifted to change in a way that would maximize the number of descendants. So one of the suggestions is that females in good condition would produce more sons, because if you produce an offspring of higher quality, let's say you can transfer more resources, males have more to gain from being above average. So on average, sons and daughters are worth the same. I hope you saw that in those cartoons. But if your personal circumstances as a parent are such that you could produce an above average individual of that sex, then you could do it. And so the rewards for being an above average son are very high because of this huge greater variation in success. Basically, mating is often a winner takes all. Every time one male mates, another male doesn't. Or one male sires offspring, another male doesn't. So if you produce a son that can sire large numbers of offspring, that's great. On average, you can't do that. But if your personal circumstances are such that you're in good condition, you can produce a more attractive or more robust son who's going to win fights or be sexier, then you might make a son. So that's where that comes from. And red deer are the classic example that's used. And there's a cool study on kakapos in New Zealand, these endangered parrots, where I'll tell you the story because it's kind of fun. So for conservation purposes, imagine you're trying to save a species. The last thing you want is for them to constantly produce sons. You'd like some daughters, because you see daughters limit the size of the population. In the kakapos, they were producing sons all the time. I was like, oh, what the hell's going on here? Someone realized, well, we're actually feeding these females lots of food. They're in very nice condition. And maybe they have an evolved response when in good condition produce sons. So they basically put the females on a diet and they started producing daughters. Make of this what you will.
Great. Before we come to Jonathan and then Marina, on the topic of smartness, let me ask one of the questions that came through online. So it's from Roger. Smart is sexy. ... Does that mean that males are good at outsmarting other males, or do females like smart males?
Yeah, so I guess in that Budgie study, I can't remember the details of it, but I think it was that the females just preferred males that were smarter. I'm guessing from memory that they probably watched them solve the task. I thought, oh, you're good with your hands. What else can you do with those hands? Well, they were birds, but you get my point. Yeah, but in the fish, for example, look, I have to, full disclosure here. I've described that study, and it is what it is. But if you think about it carefully, and this is where I'll deconstruct and shoot myself in the foot. We're recording this, aren't we? The study isn't published. I'm going to tell you when the camera's off. I'll tell you one alternative. I'm not kidding, because it's a PhD student's work.
Okay. Jonathan, please.
Thank you very much, Michael. I have 2 questions. The first one, a scientific question. The second one, a philosophical one. The scientific question is this. Which ones have more sex, males or female, and do they matter? Evolution.
Can I answer that one first?
Okay.
So I introduced that idea of the Fisher condition, right? So you've kind of almost violated that immediately by asking me that question. Because whenever there's sex, heterosexual sex, I hasten to add, you know who's there? There's a male and a female. So if you have a population with equal numbers of males and females, on average, as many men as women are having sex. Well, there's many sexual events involving men as women. So when you see these surveys in a population that's basically got an even adult male-to-female sex ratio, and the males say they've had 7.8 sexual partners and the females say 2, one of those sexes is lying. And I'll leave you to work out which one it is.
Okay, so the next question. You said at the beginning of your talk that evolution is blind. That struck me. But I was wondering at a point that perhaps you said that jovially.
No,
you mean
I
that?
said it with purpose. Yeah, I mean, so Richard Dawkins has this famous book, The Blind Watchmaker. The point of it, and this is why I say it sort of takes a lifetime of unlearning to appreciate how powerful evolution by natural selection is. Because I think, many people initially you grow up religious, or even if you're not religious, you seek some external force imposing order on the world. And so you always look for some kind of creator. People with their conspiracy theories, it's the same thing. You always think there's someone else in charge. The notion that this is the outcome of mechanical processes is so hard to accept. So in that sense, natural selection is blind because there's no desire to make things. There's no desire, no one's planning an eye. It's just the relentless step-by-step accumulation of small advantages in the ability to better perceive a threat or a food source. So that's why I talk about it being a blind process.
Okay, fantastic. But in that very context, and in the context of sex, that's the subject of today, if there is nothing out there that we can actually point to, and that's what you just gestured at, point to and say, there goes evolution, all right? But you teach evolution. That's why you have your job. You said that. And those of us who are neophytes in that field, we make sense of what you teach. And what makes sense to me really is that even though there is nothing out there that we can point to and say, there goes evolution, we are not just products of evolution. We are part of evolution. And if we are part of evolution, then evolution cannot be blind. Because we could just be manifestation of evolution.
Well, I think we are a manifestation of evolution. We're part of an unbroken chain from the very first living organism on this planet, where every single living thing you see for the rest of your life is a relative of yours.
When I desire to have sex and make babies, that's evolution desiring to make babies. So evolution is not blind. It actually desires.
Well, you may not be blind. You may be aware of what you want to do. Although I suspect a lot of the time when you're having sex, your thought is not "I want to make babies." It's "I want to have sex." But maybe you're more focused than me. I don't know. You seem like a man that knows what he wants.
Thank you, Jonathan. We have Marina at the front and then Willem at the back. I'll give the microphone over you.
Thank you, Michael, for a fantastic lecture. Just to note that a few years ago there was a student project at WITS where they had a group of outlines of endomorphic, mesomorphic, and ectomorphic men. And they asked the men which they think the women would prefer, and they said the mesomorphs, the muscle guys. And then they asked the women who they actually prefer, and they said the ectomorphs, the brainy guys. So I know that you don't really work on humans, but I'm wondering, if the fact that that we as humans have awareness and egos and things like that, if it means that evolution maybe is not so blind, and how we are influencing the evolution by the fact that we are conscious individuals as opposed to what is happening perhaps in the animal or plant kingdom.
I guess this is going to be hard. I'm going to lose my train of thought on this. One little thing is that ridiculous study I did, that's the YouTube video. Part of that actually involves asking females to judge the attractiveness of body shapes, and pretty clear that a more V-shaped, broad shoulders, narrow hips was more desirable than looking like E.T. That came through very, very clearly. And the nice thing I liked about the study we did is we didn't ask people to rate, because I feel when you're asked to rate, there's a lot of pressure to say certain things. They were shown images and they had to very quickly respond by giving it a score. And lots of things on the images varied simultaneously, these male bodies. The penis size varied, the height varied, and the body shape. And when you're pressing very quickly to give a score, it's hard to consciously decide what you do and don't. You can't pull out the individual features. It's just the overall gestalt. And from that came this preference for broad shoulders and narrow hips. And we've done that study again, for our sins. That seems to be a pretty strong, clear pattern. In terms of us changing evolution, I agree. Like I say, we are part of nature. So now we have this conscious ability to think about evolution and think, why am I having children? What is the point of this? Life is meaningless. Why am I bothering? Well, okay, some of us think this. So yeah, that's all part of the mix now. But still, evolution is relentless. It is not going to stop. As long as there is variation among individuals, it affects whether or not you have kids and is heritable, it will persist. You can't turn it off.
Thank you. Right at the back, brother.
Mr. Stand up. Hello. I was going to ask a more interesting question about King Solomon's wisdom with his 600 wives and 300 concubines, and with bulls, one bull and a herd of cows. But I think the more boring question that I want to ask then is not that. I was wondering about the sperm bank and asexual. Is it called asexual reproduction still if you use a sperm bank and no sex? And then parthenogenesis, the thing in an animal feature sometimes that happens, where reproduction without sex can happen. Just what are your thoughts? I don't know how to formulate the question.
I'll focus on the asexual reproduction. So one of the hardest things, people always say it's the hardest thing to explain, one of the hardest things to explain in biology is the evolution of sex. Because essentially when you think about it, you take a pretty well-designed individual. So let's take Edward here. He is from a long line from an almost infinitely long line of individuals who've all been successful. They've all reproduced, otherwise you wouldn't be here. So given that, why now take Edward and mess him up by putting him together with I won't point at anyone else, by mixing his genes up with someone else's and making something new? What a dumb idea. Edward looks great. Let's stick with Edward. So the evolution of sex and this recombination is a challenge to understand. But the truth of the matter is that sex is so prevalent. And by sex, I mean reproduction, where it's the coming together of genetic material from two individuals to create a new individual, rather than simply making a perfect clone, is so prevalent in nature. And when we do have asexuality evolving, so for example, there's some lizards, some geckos that reproduce asexually, they don't tend to last very long in evolutionary time. And the idea is essentially that sort of changes in the environment catch up with them. When something bad comes along, they don't have the diversity there, the genetic diversity to persist, and they get wiped out. But of course, as I say, evolution's blind. So it's not like there's a creator planning ahead and saying, better keep sex going. there should be constantly this pressure to be asexual, or most of the time to be asexual, and then occasionally have sex. So the prevalence of sex, which we can all be very grateful for, is also a conundrum. So I think that's the best I can say on that topic for now.
Thanks, Willem. I know a couple of people need to dash off to another lecture, so we'll welcome you at a next lecture for something to drink. And I think we have time for perhaps one more question online. So Robin Crew, welcome Robin. He writes, you have been describing organisms that a diplo-dip determination, but you have not mentioned the radical differences in sex ratios when there is haplodiploid sex determination. What is your comment on this?
It's yes. Yeah, thanks, Robin. I know Robin from many years ago. Yeah, so the one weird thing is, so haplodiploid species, things like ants and wasps, are kind of weird because females, daughters, occur when an egg is fertilized. So daughters have a father. Sons are little bastards because they don't have a father. They come from an unfertilized egg. And there are all kinds of interesting consequences of this for sex ratio theory, which again is like, it's, you know, I need graphs and to go through and show you the cartoons again. But they lead to novel tests of the theory, which is really cool because again, we've got this bizarre bit of natural history, and then we make different predictions about what the optimal sex ratio will be. Leads to fun ideas, for example, that in a honeybee colony, the female, if she would like it to be equal numbers of sons and daughters, but if she'd only mated once, the workers, her daughters, who are all sisters, would actually like the colony to make 75% daughters and only 25% sons. So it's like a battle going on between royalty and the workers in some social insects. Fascinating questions like that. But again, theory does a reasonably good job of predicting what eventually happens. Thanks, Robin.
Great, thank you. Any final comments? If not, then I'd like to remind Michael that he'll tell us his alternative interpretation to that final article after the recording ends, and I suggest we do that over a glass of wine. So to all those who joined online, thank you very much. To all of those in the room, please join us for something to drink and to eat out on the patio. And a final word again, Michael, thank you so much for a wonderful lecture.